I love that piece. It's entitled All is Welcome, and you are. Good morning to all of you, wherever and whenever you are. To those of you here in the sanctuary, always good to see you. And for those who are joining us from your homes or travels. We welcome you, whether this is your first time here or your 100th. We welcome you in whatever form your loves or lives take. We welcome you no matter what God you do or don't pray to. We welcome you with your bruises and blemishes, your perfections and your imperfections. We welcome you all. It's good to be with you. I'm Hilary Clark, and I'm one of a team of worship associates who have the pleasure of serving South Church along with our settled minister, Reverend Alan Quaadgras, Director of Lifespan Ministry, Kirsten Hunter, Director of Music Ministry, Johnny Pfeiffer, and all our wonderful staff, those here in the sanctuary that you see every Sunday, and those who work behind the scenes and in the office. Together, we all work together to bring you services on Sunday, and I also want to do a shout out for those who greet people and are ushers. If you need a listening device, a large print hymnal, or coloring materials, you can access those at the back of the sanctuary, or raise your hand for an usher to come down to you. The chancel flowers and candles, gorgeous, were donated by Lizzie Rosenberger and David Thomey in honor of their wedding yesterday. Sorry, I was about to say anniversary, but no, it just happened. If you have a cell phone with you, please silence it. Today, our Time for All Ages will be offered by Jen Del Deo. After the story, all the children are invited downstairs to join N and RE activities. Also a reminder that the nursery is now staffed and open for children age 3 and under. We do miss Barney. He used to always be there for the kids. And he's still alive and well, just not here in Portsmouth. The music today is offered by Susan Adams and Johnny Pfeiffer. Jennifer Leyden will open our service with the Invocation, along with Susan on the piano. And Cathy Wolff will offer a social justice testimonial after announcements.
Good morning. Just one announcement today. There had been a coffee house scheduled for last Saturday, and we had that big storm, and it wasn't safe to get here. So it has been rescheduled for April 1st, which is a Saturday, and that will happen downstairs in the social hall, and everybody is welcome.
I liked being a reporter, asking questions, getting the story, meeting the deadline. I liked the community of a newsroom, and I liked that every now and then, something I wrote made just a little difference in the world. But by my late 20s, long time ago, I had enough of he said, she said, police said, allegedly, At times I felt my own life needed attribution, so I quit. The folks at the Associated Press gave me a pup tent as a farewell gift, since they knew I did not have another job lined up. A year later, I found myself sleeping in that tent on the construction site of a nuclear power plant in Seabrook, New Hampshire. I did not quit the AP to become an anti-nuclear activist, or any other kind of activist for that matter, but I soon found myself deeply involved with the Clamshell Alliance, using nonviolent direct action to protest what I learned fairly quickly was a very dangerous and expensive way to produce electricity. It was a paradigm change and exciting change in my life, a change that I have never regretted. I found a new community of people dedicated to working collectively for social change, and I no longer had to be scrupulously objective about everything and always stand apart from it. I have not been on any front lines of activism for a long time. Life, marriage, a child, divorce, the need to earn a living, etc., intervened. But when I started coming to South Church, the last line of the mission statement immediately resonated. We inspire one another to act on our faith in the larger community. So when someone asked me last fall if I'd like to join SJA, Social Justice Associates, I figured it was a good idea. There were only 4 other members, but they're all inspiring. Robin Schnell, Janet Pulaski, Jackie Ellis, Deanna Strand. I joined and found out they were not only inspiring, but interesting and fun. In recent years, social justice associates have addressed immigrant voting and housing rights, and climate justice and living wages. Excuse me. And this year, we are focusing on being allies to Indigenous people in New Hampshire and Maine. Little plug here. With that in mind, please mark April 16, it's a Sunday, as a day to stay after service to see a film about the shaping of Europeans' earliest relations with Indigenous people, here and elsewhere. After the film, there's a free lunch and discussion. SJA members will make the lunch. Make a full day of it and come before service for a pancake breakfast I understand is being planned by South Church Youth. Again, that's April 16. Breakfast through lunch. And meanwhile, please consider joining SJA. Maybe you already act on your faith in the larger community. I know a lot of you do. Maybe not. Either way, your perspective will be welcomed. And we're a pretty good bunch of people.
Comfort me, comfort me, comfort me, oh my soul. Comfort me, comfort me, comfort me, oh my soul. Dance with me, dance with me, dance with me, oh my soul. Dance with me, dance with me, dance with me, oh my soul.
As we light the chalice in the sanctuary, we invite those of you viewing from afar to light a chalice wherever you are. We light the chalice to these words by the Reverend Scott Taylor. For those who convinced us that it was safe to share our longings, for those who proved that not everyone will run from the weight of the pain that we carry, for those who held us in our fear and helped us heal from our regret, for those whose humble apologies made us believe that we too could be forgiven, and for those whose tenderness helped us see that we no longer need to hide. Our vulnerability frees us, it binds us, it makes holy the path we travel together. May this flame ever help us keep that in view. Okay, please rise as you are able to join me in reciting the South Church mission statement. It's in your order of service, and it's also on the screen at those watching from afar. At South Church, we nurture spiritual growth through worship, learning, and community. We celebrate the worth and dignity of all people and inspire one another to act on our faith in the larger community. Thank you. I definitely have a repel-embrace relationship with my own vulnerability. I yearn for it, for the feelings of deep connection that can result from them, from exposing them. But I also defend against it, fearful of rejection and misunderstandings. My dog, Pemmy, has been teaching me a lot about this issue recently. So if you'll bear with me, I'm going to share the story of me and my dog. You see, Pemmy had been becoming more and more aggressive with other dogs. She began as an overly friendly puppy, but as she aged, events happened that taught her the world of dogs is not one to be trusted. Initially, she only growled and snarled at passing dogs. And then there were the lunges and short tussles. And finally, there was her mostly unprovoked attack on another dog. I say unprovoked, but as her mother, I have to say this particular dog had stolen her squeaky ball the week before at the beach. But she held that grudge, only to launch an unprovoked attack a week later. So Pemmy's actual name is Miss Pemmijuwasit, the small but mighty. I hadn't wanted a small dog, so when I found this 40-pounder, I thought I needed to remind her that size does not define the dog. Unfortunately, as she began to feel more and more vulnerable, she took it upon herself to attack before being attacked. But what she still loved to do more than anything was to play unrestrained at the beach, in the woods, in the fields. But I could no longer allow her to do that. We needed help. I was lucky to find a skilled trainer to help us through this. This may come as no surprise to all of you, but the trainer diagnosed the problem as me. I am responsible for judging the safety of a situation and keeping her safe if need be. Her job is to look to me for assurance that I have the situation under control. Like Pemmy, my responses to dogs nearby had become one of defensiveness, stiffening up, yanking Pemmy back to me, sometimes yelling at her. I just felt too vulnerable in those times. But with help, I'm learning a new pattern of behavior, one of thoughtful assessment of the situation, and usually concluding that the world and this situation is safe. It's a lot of work, but we're moving towards this. So under the skilled hands of trainer Aaron, I witnessed Pemmy moving from aggressive defensiveness to unbounded joyful playing. Aaron allowed Pemmy to notice the unknown dog, go slowly towards it, observe all the doggy behaviors, while constantly doing a dance of controlling her proximity to the unknown dog and also checking with my trainer, that all was safe. With help and the passage of time, she was able to expose her vulnerability, learn to trust, and ultimately reap the rewards of unfettered joy once again. So as I travel this road with Pemmy, I'm brought back to a moment in my life when I felt most vulnerable and unsafe. and responded with defensiveness and anger. I had a best friend in high school. We were inseparable. I remember the sense of safety and lack of self-consciousness I felt when I was around her. Those were tumultuous years for me, and it was good to have such a close friend. After we graduated from high school, we went our separate paths for a year and then reunited as apartment mates. Our lives had started to turn in opposite directions, but we were still good friends. And then we weren't. I was going through a period of deep depression. I was emotionally needy, and she was branching out and finding her way. Promises were made and broken, misunderstandings, harsh words. And finally, I said enough and stopped contact with her. We continued on our separate ways. Periodically, she'd send me a note or a gift. She apologized. I turned away, afraid of my own sense of vulnerability. And I often thought of her and hoped that someday we'd reunite. But it never happened because she died before we had the opportunity to do that. And I'll always wish that I had allowed someone to help me drop my defenses, that someone had taught me to repair and nurture the love that I had shared with her. And I hope that I have learned that today is the day to be brave, to be vulnerable, because tomorrow may not come. Thank you. Please rise as you are able and join us in singing opening music. The Growing Light.
Okay, it's time to invite any kids and anyone else who would like to hear a time for all ages to come up a little bit closer. You can come sit on the floor right here. I didn't know how many people would be here because the time changed, didn't it? And sometimes when we set the clocks ahead, we go, oh, it's too early. I can't get up this early. But I'm happy to see so many people. So today, for Time for All Ages, we're going to do a lot of pretending and imagining. So first, I'm going to pretend that I'm brand new here at this church. I'm going to pretend I'm brand new. I'm here on Sunday morning. And maybe Reverend Ellen is doing a sermon, and then she does that thing where she asks everybody to turn to someone nearby and share something awkward. Which I actually love those opportunities. If you don't know me well, I love awkward. Didn't always, but I love it now. And you'll see why by the end of this, I think. So I'm brand new. It feels really awkward. Maybe Tim is sitting near me. And so Tim and I have this awkward question we have to answer to each other. And then at the end of that, it's kind of like there's this, now that we've had this little moment, there's kind of a string between us. We don't know each other well yet, but we had this little tiny moment. And so we're kind of connected in this way. And the string isn't very strong. It's vulnerable to breaking or something happening to it. But it's there, It's something. And so then maybe the next Sunday I come and there's worship, and then after I go downstairs for a cup of coffee and I see Tim and I'm like, oh, hey, Tim. And we have a little conversation and our string starts to feel a little stronger. But then maybe Tim, maybe I'm like, oh, tell me something exciting. And maybe Tim says, well, I got a new car. I'm like, oh, that's great. And maybe Tim says, yeah, but I had to get red. And red is the worst color. I hate red. I think it's awful. And maybe I'm feeling a little bit embarrassed about that. And Tim recognizes it too. And that mistake could feel kind of like this sharp pair of big scissors cutting could feel like that, right? Has anyone ever experienced something like that where you think you're kind of knowing someone and then something happens and your connection feels lost? And so then what? Are we just done? Do we just like walk away and be done? We could. That's one option. But what's something else we could do? Sasha?
Remake your relationship.
We could remake our relationship. So either one of us could start that, right? I could say, actually, I really like red, and I feel embarrassed that you just said that. Or Tim could recognize it, and maybe he'd be like, oh my gosh, I just said something really insensitive, and I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. And so that's kind of like either one of us taking that opportunity. There's vulnerability there too, right? Once it's broken, it's a whole lot of vulnerability to either walk away or decide to try to put it back together. And so if we talk to each other and try to make that right, maybe then we're tying a knot. And the knot might be a good one, or it might not. Depends. Like, I don't know what kind of knot tying experience Tim has. I actually bet he has really good knot tying experience. But Eagle Scout probably has good knots. But there's a knot. We put that there. And then we continue on. Oh, then I drop my end of the string. That's kind of a problem too, but I can pick it back up. I forgot to contact Tim or reach back out to him. So, our string is pretty tight again. So then maybe I make a plan to, maybe I'm gonna help Tim paint his house. And I'm like, yeah, I'll be there on Saturday. I'll see you there. And then maybe I forget. Maybe I totally forget to show up. And here come the scissors again. Shoot, broke that string again. So, again, can choose to be like, well, I didn't want to paint that house anyway, and I'm just gonna, we're done. Or I can be like, Tim, I am so sorry. What can I do to make this right? And so Tim and I maybe talk about it, and we figure it out, and we tie this knot. It's a different kind of knot, and look, that one's actually looks stronger, doesn't it? I don't know if it actually is, but actually, I think it's not. So yeah, we reinforce and we tie the knots. Do you notice anything now that we've tied those two knots? Anything happen there? And so then maybe I ask Tim to volunteer to be a senior youth advisor. And I'm like, we could really use a good camp chef. And so Tim's like, yeah, I can do that. And so me asking something from Tim is a vulnerable thing too. But he said yes, and so he's actually giving me something. Look what happens if I ask and then he gives me something. Does that look, and we twist it? What's happening to the string? Twisting it. And is anything about it different than when we started besides that? It's shorter. Yep. And so what does that mean about Tim and I? We're closer. And the string is a little bit stronger, isn't it? It's getting stronger every time this happens. Would it be getting stronger or shorter if we had just like walked away once it was cut? No. Or if I hadn't asked Tim for help? or if he hadn't offered me the help, it wouldn't be shorter and stronger, would it? And so maybe then we decide to go on a trip to West Virginia with a whole bunch of teens, and we get into some really hard conversations and do some difficult work, and we make that string even stronger and shorter. And sometimes the scissors still show up, but sometimes those knots are even actually harder to cut that string. The scissors can't cut it as easily. So maybe the scissors come and they put a nick in it, but maybe it's not broken, and so it's easier to actually keep continuing to make it stronger and stronger. And that's what vulnerability can do. We have the option a lot of times with vulnerability in our relationships to make it stronger, to make the string shorter and stronger, and eventually we get closer and closer. And we don't always choose that. Sometimes we choose to just walk away, and that's a separate thing, but we have the option to get closer. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going downstairs.
Now is the time in our service when you're asked to share your financial riches so that we can support the good work of our church as it transforms the words of our mission statement into actions that strengthen our communities and promote justice for all. This month, we are sharing our Sunday collection with Women Aid of Greater Portsmouth. Women Aid is an all-volunteer organization established in 2005 to support people from 6 Greater Portsmouth communities, people who have exhausted all their resources and the community resources and need financial help to move forward. Your donation could help repair a car or pay for childcare or help with health care expenses. You could offer the hand that pulls someone through that hard place. You may donate online through our website or on the Vanco app. You can mail a check to our office or put cash in the collection plate. Your generosity could change someone's life or pay or put a roof on the building. The offering is now gratefully received.
precious day.
This is our time of community, meditation, and prayer. There's a lot that's been going on in our world these days that might be on our minds. From the anniversary of the pandemic tomorrow, to events reminding us of the financial unpredictability of our times, to white supremacists distressingly projecting their messages onto buildings in Florida, to our queer, trans, non-binary people repeatedly targeted with regressive legislation, and the devastating impacts of our climate crisis on the West Coast. Even so, there are also signs of hope and courage, not the least of which is Generation Z activists on social media mobilizing millions to protect our planet from Arctic drilling. In the name of these challenges and with hope for the power of taking action where we can, I invite us into a deeper time of prayer and meditation with these words by Reverend Tamara Labach. It's called A Prayer of Risk. Holy One, who has given us the breath of life, let us remember today to breathe deeply, to rest, to take in, to pause before we act, and then to take in another deep breath, poised on the edge, and risk jumping in. Risk taking action. Risk speaking up. Risk using the gifts we have been given so that at the end of our life, we can say with absolute clarity that no part of our existence was wasted in fear of failure or fear of success. Spirit, hold us. Prepare us the way to begin to offer the gift of our awakened presence, full of love and light today. These and the prayers of our hearts let us hold in a moment of silence. Amen. Into the love and light we have envisioned, I invite you to honor the prayers of your heart publicly, to honor your joys and sorrows by participating in the lighting of candles when the music begins. And please remember, if you are going through a difficult time, I am here, as are your pastoral associates. If you need us, please fill out the card in the pew. You can place it in the basket at one of the tables in front, or you can come find me or email me or them after the service. We are here for you. I now invite you to light a candle of joy or sorrow that is in your heart. Vulnerability is a popular topic these days, at least according to my iPhone. When I searched for this term on my device, there they were, podcast after podcast on this topic, with titles like Radical Vulnerability, Voices in Vulnerability, Vulnerable and Vivacious for those who want to spice it up. There's La Vulnérabilité for people who prefer to be vulnerable in French. There's the podcast called Men Are Vulnerable Too, reminding us to check our assumptions. There's Troy Discovers Vulnerability, with a picture of Troy looking, if not totally vulnerable, that enough, perhaps, to be a testament to the idea that men really can be vulnerable too. There was Badass vulnerability, personal favorite of mine. There was music for the vulnerability hangover, there was unlocking vulnerability, and there was comfortably vulnerable with a picture of a small child who actually does not look at all comfortable. But maybe that's okay, because if you're 100% comfortable, how vulnerable are you being really? Still, it makes sense to me that at least one of those feature a picture of a small child, because I think young people are some of our greatest teachers on this topic. Like my friend's 2-year-old, who appears to be very comfortable with his vulnerability, loves to run around without clothes on, natural, free, unencumbered, absolutely nothing to hide. There is something to be learned from that level of unself-consciousness, even if we do not totally follow that clothing optional style. But there is something to be learned, because most of us who are anything past 2 have been taught a lot about covering up. So in this sermon on Vulnerability 2.0, I want to start there with the first part, with 1.0, with what happened in the first place. Why do we even need to be taught to unlock this? I saw a trailer for a movie. It's called The Mask You Live In. It focuses on how boys in our culture are trained to hide what's going on, trained to cover things up. The clip opens with quick, successive snapshots of boys, first from the age of 4 or 5 or 6 and 7. You can see the openness in their young faces. And then there's an 8-year-old, then 10, 11, teens, young adult men, snapshot after snapshot. And in the voiceover, you hear what they heard growing up. Stop crying. Stop with the tears. Don't cry. Pick yourself up. Stop with the emotions. Don't let anyone disrespect you. Be cool and kind of a jerk. Be a man. As the images flip past, you can practically see the layers come on as facial expressions get harder and tougher and more distant. Ashanti Branch, educator and youth advocate, runs a group for middle school boys in Oakland and is featured in the video. What is it you don't let people see? He asks a group of fresh-faced 12 and 13-year-old boys sitting in a circle with him. The video cuts to what the kids have written on their loose leaf pages. We see anger scribbled in block letters on one. My pain, my heart is written neatly on another. Anger is on a third. Almost 90% of you wrote that anger and pain on the back of that paper, Ashanti said, and then to the camera, our kids get up every morning and prepare their mask for how they're going to walk to school. A lot of our students don't know how to take the mask off. This is what the boys and men in our culture have had to contend with. But whatever our gender growing up, we all got a lot of messages to keep our feelings to ourselves, to grow up, don't cry, hide the hard stuff from other people. So that's what most of us tend to do. We cover it up, go it alone, often when we most need help with what's going on inside. And it's so part of the culture, we may not even realize we're doing that. But it still has an effect on our relationships. It keeps us apart makes it hard to show up for each other, hard to show up as ourselves with all that challenges us, but also with all that is beautiful that's also there under the layers inside. We need help unlocking our vulnerability. And on some level, we do know this. We crave this, or so it seems from the stunning popularity of Brené Brown's work on vulnerability and those countless podcasts of which I named only a few. Brené's first TED Talk from 2010 got nearly 30 million views. It is one of the most popular TED Talks of all time. Her books have hit the bestseller list one after another. Brené Brown hit a sweet spot or a soft spot or a need, tapping into our longing to get genuinely closer to people, to shorten those strings that connect us, to recover our childlike heart and become what Brené calls wholehearted. There's just one little problem. The journey to get there, those layers that covered us up. I don't think I need to tell you, those are not so easy to just peel back and take off. So, vulnerability 1.0, how did we get here? Why do we need this? Vulnerability 2.0, practice, practice, practice. What does vulnerability look like? How do we practice? Because those layers, they are all gummed up with feelings like anger and pain and shame that we don't want to feel, don't think we can show, and got covered over with defenses like perfectionism, competition, comparing, or with being cool and a little aloof, like those young men in that movie. But we can still practice vulnerability, which can look, in Brené's words, like saying, I love you, first. Asking for a raise. Sitting with your partner who has stage 3 cancer and trying to make plans for your children. Or like sending your child to school knowing how excited he is about orchestra tryouts and how much he wants to make first chair, and encouraging him and supporting him and knowing he is not going to get it. Practicing vulnerability takes emotional exposure, open-heartedness, and courage. In a sermon on this topic, Reverend Kim Crawford Harvey gives a particularly striking example of someone practicing courageous vulnerability that I want to share with you. Years ago, she organized a conference, she said, and made what she called the very questionable decision to place a talk by a well-known psychotherapist and Zen practitioner after a wildly charismatic young storyteller. The storyteller finished her performance a tour de force. The crowd was on its feet, all riled up and ready to dance, when a quiet, unassuming, elder gentleman took the stage. Off stage, Kim had offered him the option of having the audience take a break before he asked them to settle down, drop into silence, and follow their breath. He declined and used the moment in an unforgettable way. Sitting down and folding up his legs, he closed his eyes and began a monologue, an extraordinary Dharma talk. Feeling old, he said, cataloging his feelings. obsolete, head hurts, lonely, sad, not good enough, not enough. The room quieted down. He continued with his interior inventory, breathing fast, palms sweaty, face hot, fear, shame, fear, shame. People were sitting down. The room was absolutely silent. After a long time, he said, Zen is being absolutely authentic, true to ourselves, living the unvarnished truth in this very moment. We only become more fully ourselves when we open our minds and our hearts and start exactly where we are. A few people began to weep. His teaching had already begun. Vulnerability can make your palms sweaty. But even when you're not faced with an audience full of riled up people, even one-on-one practicing vulnerability can be a little fraught. And it seems even Brené has learned something since that original TED Talk, as evidenced by an interview with Oprah Winfrey, where they discusses when you might consider not opening up, not showing your vulnerability. It made me wonder just how many people came back to Brené saying, I did what you said. I was really vulnerable with my wife, my daughter, my best friend, my tennis partner, my hiking buddy, and it did not work out so well. On the one hand, when you're struggling with a painful emotion like shame, sharing it with someone who can be genuinely present is like balm for an open wound. On the other hand, as Brené said in her conversation with Oprah, if we share our shame story with the wrong person, or I will add, at the wrong time, it can become one more piece of debris in an already dangerous storm. Like the friend Brown shares who gasps in dismay and confirms just how ashamed you really ought to be. Now you're still in shame and you're one friend down. Or the friend who responds with sympathy, actually with pity, who feels sorry for you and so leaves you feeling like a victim of your circumstances, small and disempowered. Or there's the friend who confuses connection with an opportunity to one-up you. That's nothing, they'll say. Wait till you hear the awful thing that happened to me. The fact is, when we take the risk of being more vulnerable, we will not do it perfectly. In his sermon on vulnerability, Reverend Roger Burchausen notes a couple of particular pitfalls to watch out for on our own end, too, when sharing our vulnerability. Sometimes, he suggests, we think we're being authentic, but we're actually being a little manipulative. Perhaps we've made a mistake, but talk so much about our own painful regret that we manipulate the other person into comforting us, rather than taking responsibility for the mistake we made. Or maybe we're in an already vulnerable, overly vulnerable position with respect to someone else, like an abusive spouse or a boss with too much power. Being vulnerable in that situation can be risky and simply reinforce an already problematic dynamic. Or maybe we fall into oversharing, taking up too much space, unmindful of others' needs or ability to hear and take it in. We have forgotten others have limits too. And who hasn't had that moment when you see in someone's eyes, ooh, shared too much, went on too long, said something that triggered them, you see the walls come up and you know it is time to find that music for a vulnerability hangover. I have definitely done that. As we practice, we will bump our heads as we keep learning how to be thoughtful, skillful, mindful with our vulnerability. And I think of this place here, and this is where you're all probably thinking, is this when she's going to ask us to turn to each other and say something really awkward? No. That comes later. Because I think of small groups in church, covenant groups, wellspring groups, morning poems, even check-ins at regular meetings, and yes, maybe even coffee hour. Church is designed to create a little more safety than we have out there in the regular world, designed to make some room. It's a place where we can practice being present to others' true selves, even as we get to take small risks in showing more of our own. Small risks that maybe make your palms sweat just a little, but also uncover that beautiful self that is still there underneath everything, vulnerable, open-hearted, and waiting. We may have some layers that block us. We may have some defenses that separate us, and we may make some missteps. But the good news is that wholeheartedness is within the reach of anyone. And we have young teachers everywhere. So, beginning today, may we practice and continue to unlock the potential of vulnerability and the beauty that goes with it for ourselves and for the generations to come. Amen. Let us join together in our closing hymn, number 311, Let It Be a Dance. Please rise in body or in spirit.
we extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
If we are going to find our way back to each other, vulnerability is going to be that path. May we walk that path with intention and courage and gentleness. And let us, in the words of Reverend Kathleen McTeague, remember the wholeness of our lives and the weaving of light and shadow in this great and astonishing dance in which we all move. Amen. Blessed be. Go in peace.